Okay, excellent. We got everyone here. That's a good day right there. Okay, so book review time. We have Max and Jared. Which one of you guys want to go first? Jared, you volunteered. Excellent.
Yeah,
Mr.
that
Baldwin,
very
Yes.
confident.
which book report feedback are we turning this in under?
This one, good question. What I ended up doing, I can't remember what I did. I've slept twice since I did it. Now I can't
Because I
remember.
found some that I didn't submit, but I have a grade on some of them, so I was confused.
Yes. Isn't that wonderful? I'm so generous. What I think I did is I think I by faith gave you all 40 points for the last book review. So it was either book review number 1 or the last book review. I can't remember. Um so just go ahead and submit it under this last, I guess it'd be book review number 1, I think is what I moved to the last
Okay.
date. So if you already have a grade in there, still submit it. I think what I did is I just I knew you were all going to get them turned in. I'll go back and reconcile. If you like double submitted on one, don't worry about it. Just submit it as book review number 1, and I'll take care of all the points and everything if I haven't already. So I think I already
Okay.
did. I think I already kind of loaded you guys up on that, but we'll see. Okay. All right. Jared Ball. I believe I've given you screen sharing ability if you want it.
Thank you. Thank you. I was going to use it for a video, but seeing how those things haven't worked out too great for the screen share, I may just summarize the video in the end.
All right.
But for now, I'm going to be here. Let me copy over into the chat the title of the book because it and the subtitle are the subtitle is pretty long. But I'm going to be doing my book review on The Leader in You, How to Win Friends, Influence People, and Succeed in a Changing World. That title may seem a bit familiar because it's written kind of as a companion, not at the same time, but it's written kind of as a companion to this book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Very, very popular book. All of you have no doubt heard of it. Written by Dale Carnegie. And he
Yeah,
was
Dale Carnegie was like that book has got to be one of the best sellers in before this last decade, probably best sellers of all time when it comes to sales and management.
absolutely. It's a fantastic book. He was born in, I think, 1888, died in 1955. And he was known for his writing and his lectures. And what this book, though, The Leader in You, does is it basically walks through the successes and the lectures and the anecdotes from Dale Carnegie and several other people and lays down a structure for how to be a good and successful leader. So, uh, as I was going through this book, I really liked what I started to grasp was the main crux of the book, and that was treating people the way that they should be treated, um, especially by a leader. So, jumping into the introduction, Dale Carnegie is quoted at the beginning of the book, reminiscing on his time teaching and public speaking. But the important part is that while he was teaching, he learned that young people were desperately in need of learning how to get along with other people. It seems that's just a natural part of life, but he realized, oh, these people actually need help on learning how to do this. And not just business wise, but as a human being. So Carnegie invested into these students the necessity of caring for other people and taking time to see their perspective. And that establishes the theme of the book pretty early on. So one example that I really liked that was given in the book was a guy by the name of Charles Schwab gets paid $1 million a year salary simply for handling people. And the book goes into dissecting why is that? How can you get paid $1 million a year just for learning how to handle people? And it's human relations. It's essential to business. And leadership really is all about people. So at the beginning of the book, it clarifies that leadership is enabling people to succeed at what they're already gifted at. You're not going in and teaching all these people the skills that they need. They're already gifted in many areas. So one of your responsibilities as a leader is get to know them, realize what they're gifted at, and establish a clear vision for the future. So in order to establish those relationships, a leader first has to understand who the person is. And each person brings their own unique qualities and attributes to the situation that is different from the leader and different from each other. And it's their responsibility, as it's the responsibility of the leader, to find what those people are good at and adapt it for what the goal is for the team. So a quote that I liked from Fred Ebb in the book is, "Don't try to impersonate others, never stop being yourself." Your followers will notice this. So once the leader comes in and establishes a relationship with the people that he's leading, he has to be upfront and honest with them and be the person that he or she truly is to the people that he's going to start building a relationship with. So one key aspect of relationships is communication. And then the book goes into talking about how do you communicate with these people that you're now going to be leading. The point is made in the book, and it's a very emphasized point, that if a subordinate takes the risk of communicating with you as a leader, whether you agree or disagree with their suggestion, do absolutely nothing to discourage them from communicating with you in the future. Because once you establish this rapport of being able to communicate back and forth between you as the leader and them as the subordinate, that's extremely valuable and necessary to being the type of leader that this book is educating you to become. To make it a two-way relationship, it's important to understand where that other person is coming from, and this is where the book moves into emphasizing understanding the subordinate's position or point of view. So if you want somebody to do something, and as a leader, if you're running a project, if you're running an organization, if you want your subordinates to do something, you have to motivate them to do something. And first off, you have to understand where they're coming from. You need to understand their position. So once you grasp what their view is of you, you can then establish motivation for them that will hit them where it counts. So motivation doesn't come out of nowhere. It's fostered in the workplace. Listen to those who are subordinate to you, understand where they're coming from, and then you can motivate them to do what their responsibility is. Then the book moves into talking about creating teams, because as we've learned in this class, teams are essential for especially business. This class is about project management, and that requires teams. So the book lays out a plan for success when establishing teams. Understand that you're organizing people into groups, and those people are individuals. So once you understand that, then you've got a better grasp of what you're working with. You're not just moving pawns around on a board. It's not a game with a bunch of players. You have to establish a purpose that connects the individuals. So make them feel like they're actually part of something bigger than themselves. You can also foster this by making the goals team goals. This will create an environment not only for camaraderie, but for healthy competition. Like we've mentioned before in class, there's a difference between, we laid out the difference between harsh competition and rivalry. This is good in the business place when you have something to look to and compete with, not for the purpose of destroying the other person or people, but to make yourself better. And a good leader knows how to foster this kind of environment. Um, and the book lays out a good list of steps to keep in mind to get to that point. Then the book talks about a couple more responsibilities that the leader has. As the leader, you have the role of a mentor. You're not just setting up a structure for the ants to run around in. In fact, it's far from it. You take the time to invest and become part of the process yourself. You're not sitting in the ivory tower looking down and instructing, calling out orders. And this separates the bosses from the leaders. And I think we saw this, it might have been back in History and Theology of Leadership. There was a picture of the difference between bosses and leaders. It may have been somewhere else, but it was the slave driver in the back whipping those in the front who were pulling him versus the leader in the front pointing out to the future and dragging the rest behind him or pulling them forward. So an essential aspect of that picture, which is the main crux of this book, is you need to have a relationship to call back to those behind you and say, follow me. And what this book does is it lays out, how do you build a relationship with the people who you're responsible for, and how do you get them to care about your mission, your goal, and how can you care for their needs? So I guess in summation, I'll say that a leader that respects and connects with them under him can foster even more growth by recognizing and rewarding those who perform well. This is kind of like the final step. Once you have that relationship, once you have connected with those people and they start performing, you recognize what they've done and you reward that. And so that keeps the system going. That keeps people desiring to do well, to perform higher and better. So I guess that's the whole of the book. It's a really good read. I highly recommend it. I'm not going to play the video because I've probably gone a little long anyway. It was a video with a general that I found talking about the very same thing. It's General Hugh Shelton, interviewed by Jim Whitehurst. You can look it up online. It's
Why
on
don't you
leadership.
shoot me a link to that, and I'll share it with everyone later.
Sure.
People can watch it on their own. I love collecting those types of videos. So
Oh yeah. It's a really short video just talking about the essence that leaders care for people. And that's what this book was all about. As a leader, you're caring for people, and those people in turn will care for you and the mission. So
yeah, that's
that's
good.
my book.
That's good. Let's give them a round of applause, everybody. All right, excellent, Jared. Good job. It sounds like a very good application to, and I'm not even sure if that author is a Christian or not, but it sounds like they definitely understand the reality of a leadership role is not just like a plaque on your door or opportunity to exercise power. It's really an exercise in helping people. And that's like that book I just read, The Motive, about really the top question a leader should ask is, can I serve more people by being in this position? So it's great. Okay. And it demystifies it too. It makes it not sound so scary to be a leader. It actually makes it sound like, hey, if I get to help more people, of course I'd want to be all about that. So good job. All right, Max, you're up.
All right. I will be sharing a screen here. Can you guys see that?
I can see it.
All right.
I'm going to mute myself so you don't have to listen to me drinking coffee, but I'm with you in spirit, mind, and body. Two of the three.
So my book was Failing Forward, Turning Mistakes into Stepping Stones for Success. This was written by John C. Maxwell. And basically, each chapter just kind of had a lesson about how to take the failures in your life and apply them, and don't let them keep you down and keep you from success, but instead use those to push you forward towards success. Uh, so like I said, each chapter was one lesson, and so I'll just kind of walk through each chapter and give the summary of what that looks like. So the first one was realize there's one major difference between average people and achieving people, and basically that major difference between that is how you respond to it. Um, Everybody encounters failures, but the difference, the thing that sets average people apart from those who achieve is how the achieving people respond to it. They take that and they use that and they learn from that, and they use that and move forward. Whereas average people would see failures and see that as a wall, and they would stop. And so really the major difference between achieving people is that they use those failures as a stepping stone to keep going further. Um, the second chapter talked about learning a new definition of failure. And here the author talked about that failure is not an isolated event, rather it's a contributor towards success. And like I said, kind of building off that last chapter where people view failures as an ending point, rather those who are achieving, they see that as part of the process. It's not an isolated event, rather it's part of the whole process that gets you towards success. The third chapter is remove the you from failure. And this was kind of talking about your identity almost. And the main point of this chapter was to not let failure define who you are. Like I said, everybody fails, but just because you fail doesn't mean that you are a failure. And so he was really just driving at the point that don't let failure become your identity and keep moving forward in that. So the fourth chapter is take action and reduce your fear. And this one was talking about don't internalize the fear of failure. Break the cycle by changing you and not your feelings. Because we all have feelings of fear. We're all afraid to fail. But in order to break out of that cycle of fear, you have to make the change yourself. You can't just wait till your feelings change about doing something, about not failing. You can't just wait for that to change. Rather, you have to go out and make the change yourself. And so that one was kind of talking about before failure. You're letting the fear of failure keep you from succeeding. But this one was talking about you kind of just have to go out and get it, because if you're sitting there afraid, you're never going to do it. The fifth chapter talked about change your response to failure by accepting responsibility. And this is kind of building off of that. In order to break the cycle, you have to take responsibility for your own failures. You can't just pin everything on your circumstances around you, but the responsibility that is yours, you have to take that and you have to learn from it and change from that. The sixth chapter talks about don't let the failure from outside get inside you. And this one was kind of talking about the outlook that you have, your perception and your interpretation of the failures that happen. So the outlook of failure determines how you fight it. If you view it as something that's insurmountable, you're not gonna even try to fight it. But if you recognize that it's a stepping stone, it's part of the path of success, then you recognize that, then you'll be able to see it for what it is and continue through it and push past the failure. Number 7 is say goodbye to yesterday. And this one was really talking about don't let the past keep you from succeeding in the future. He talked a lot about how everyone has failures in their life. It's an inescapable part of humanity. And the important thing is to not let the past failures that you've experienced keep you from successes in the future. Because if you keep holding on to the past and recognizing that you've had these failures, but then you let that drag you down, you're never going to move past that into the future and succeed later on. The 8th chapter talked about change yourself and your world changes. This is kind of going back to chapter 5, changing your response, but this one is changing your circumstances starts with yourself and those failing circumstances. So this is kind of talking about not getting in a cycle of failure. And if you recognize that the circumstances are helping you fail, then you have to change the circumstances that you're in. So part of this is recognizing the failures that are happening around you and taking some time to examine where that's coming from. Is that from your circumstances? Is that from you? And making the important changes that are necessary. The ninth lesson is failure comes, get over yourself and start giving yourself. And then this chapter really talked about that failure comes to people who are focused on themselves. The people who are successful in life are focused on others. And in order to really get out of this rut of failure, we have to stop looking at ourselves and instead turn our gaze to other people and start serving them. And that's really what again differentiates those who succeed and those who don't. Because if you're constantly focused on yourself, you're just going to be turning inward and then constantly keep failing. The 10th chapter talks about finding the benefit in every bad experience. And then this one is again acknowledging the fact that everyone fails, and so you just kind of have to take that in stride and recognize that it's part of the path, and you have to find the good in that and learn from it, and continue building and using that as a stepping stone. Chapter 11: if at first you don't succeed, try something harder. And this one was talking about, if you're in a circumstance and you try something and you succeed without any inhibitors, then you're probably doing something too easy. And part of that may be a fear of failure, so you try something easy. But his goal, his challenge for this chapter was be willing to take a risk in order to succeed. If you're doing something and it's not a challenge, it's not really a success. But you have to be willing to give something. You have to be willing to risk something in order to achieve something, to have success. And so his challenge for this was to keep pushing yourself to do things that are harder and things that you didn't think you could do, but to just keep challenging yourself. Number 12, learn from a bad experience and make it a good one. Again, this is similar to chapter 10. But his emphasis was failure can be the best teacher that you have. And in some of the examples, he talked about how people who are hiring, they wouldn't look for people who had the greatest successes, but they would look for people who had a lot of failures, because failure teaches you a lot more than success ever will. And so really just recognizing that failure is a good teacher, and in fact one of the best teachers that we have. And so taking that and learning from that and building on that. Chapter 13, work on the weaknesses that weakens you. This is talking about recognizing the weaknesses that are in yourself, whether it's public speaking or interpersonal skills or whatever the case may be. The example that he used was a man who had poor interpersonal skills. And the focus really was to take a weakness, work on it, and make it a strength. So take that failure that's in your life and invest time in it and work on it, and then make it a strength and make it a success in your life. And that just takes a lot of time and investment and determination. But some things in your life that are weaknesses right now, you can actually work on those and turn them into a strength. The 14th chapter talked about understand there's not much difference between failure and success. And really, he talked about the difference between failure and success is perseverance. The successful keep going. Like I said, kind of harkening back to chapter 1, realizing that the major difference is how you respond to it. This is, they don't see it as a wall, rather they see it as the next step. So the important part to view here is that you have to keep persevering in this path. You can't just stop when you hit a failure. You have to keep going. The last chapter talked about get up and get over it and get going. And he kind of built on the last chapter. You need more than just perseverance to achieve success. You need a direction. So you have to sit down, you have to plan, you have to understand your strengths and weaknesses, and you have to move forward, and you have to plan a direction on how to achieve success. So that's basically the whole book. He had a lot of examples in there. I I enjoyed reading the book, but there were a lot of things that I didn't really like so much about it. Some of his examples didn't really contribute well to the points that he was making. And I looked him up briefly, and I saw that he was a pastor. I didn't see what denomination, but part of the thing that was frustrating about this book was that a lot of the examples that he used or the motivations that he talked about, they stopped just short of the ultimate motivation that we have. So like in perseverance, or like especially in the chapter of taking the focus off yourself and focusing on others, he stopped just short, and it seemed like the motivation for that was then so that way you have success, so it's back on you. Whereas, you know, we know that our reason for serving other people is to bring glory to God. And it was stuff like that throughout the whole book, he just stopped short of our ultimate motivation of doing it for God, but rather it kind of leaving it that step short left it as a selfish motivation. And then going back to a lot of the examples that he used didn't seem to contribute to his points super well. But otherwise, besides that, I enjoyed the book.
All right, let's give Max a round of applause. Thank you very much, Max. Good job. Yeah, you know, John Maxwell, the author of that book, I can't remember if anyone else read a John Maxwell book for their review, but so he gets criticized for that because he could definitely put the gospel in all these books more. I think the flip side of the argument for him is some of these books are intended for a very broad audience. You know, failing forward could easily be a secular topic, and so he walks a fine line. I like most of his stuff, but I do agree with you. You know, there are times where it's like, oh, this would be a perfect place to just insert a biblical principle, but for whatever reason, he's not. And so he what ends up happening is he doesn't want to cram something in there that's just a biblical story so that every illustration is a biblical story, because I've seen people do that too. But yeah, he could definitely be more overt. He does have some books that are strictly like a Christian leadership. Oh, someone did There's No Such Thing as Business Ethics, right? Who did that one? I can't remember who was the one that was that. Maybe I can't remember. Oh, Tim. So he did another Maxwell book there. So overall, he's kind of the granddaddy of Christian leadership literature. He's written, there's a whole Maxwell library. So anyway, that being said, excellent review. Make sure you guys send me, if you have anything, you can send me an email, PowerPoint, stuff like that, video links, and then submit it as your assignment online as well. Okay, I want to talk for a few minutes with everybody, all my students. All our guests can just listen in and participate for a little bit. And then what we're going to do is, after this short discussion, I'm going to break you into your team so you guys can talk amongst yourselves, and I'm going to keep our two guests back and just talk to them briefly. So I want to talk about the last three chapters we've been reading. We read a chapter on conflict resolution. We read a chapter on problem solving, and we read a chapter on decision making. And they naturally all go together. And this whole class has been within the context of project management, but all these principles, if you don't get into the technical aspects of like the tools they actually use for these things, all these principles apply to every type of leadership opportunity you're ever going to have. So I want to talk about conflict resolution first, and everyone's going to have to answer something. So if you hear an easy, low-hanging fruit question and you want to jump in, then you might be free from having to answer a much tougher question later on. So, or you can gamble and wait till the end. Maybe the easiest question's at the end. But if you're interested in answering, just jump in, just unmute yourself and jump right in. So conflict resolution is needed when there's no mutually beneficial outcome to a common problem. Okay, so we're not talking about necessarily like in a family or in a church member setting, stuff like that. We're talking about within a team. So it could be a business team, a work team, a volunteer team, a sports team. So some type of functioning team environment is the context of this idea. So what would you on a team consider to be the tipping point when a conflict becomes counterproductive? So Not all conflict is damaging, but there must be some tipping point. When do you think it tips the scale and starts to become counterproductive, where a conflict hurts a team versus helping a team?
Dibs on this one.
Go ahead.
So when the conflict starts to be directed towards those who hold a different perspective or different idea than you, I would say is a very clear point at when this becomes destructive. If you have one side that wants A, other side wants B, and then side A starts directing their maybe their work against side B, that's when it's become conflict inside of the project. So you need to turn that around somehow as the leader and realize and help the team realize, hey, we have different perspectives on this. We're still working towards the same goal. Turn your guns away from each other. You need to de-escalate that situation.
Yeah, that's good. Caleb's book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, the bottom of the pyramid Caleb talked about is lack of trust. And then the one right above that's fear of conflict. And people have a fear of conflict within a meeting or a team when they think people are going to make it personal. So you disagree strongly about something, that's okay. You disagree strongly about something, and now you start making it personal, where outside of that meeting or outside of that team gathering, you're holding a grudge. That obviously becomes a negative conflict. Or if the conflict is, like Jared said, where now the conflict is not about ideas related to solving a problem, the conflict is about each other. Well, you're as Jared said, shooting your guns at each other. Jocko Willink, the guy who wrote Extreme Ownership, he's got a great podcast. Former U.S. Navy SEAL, head of the training command. He talks, one of the points in his book, Extreme Ownership, is about remembering where the enemy is. The enemy is not in here. The enemy is out there, and reminding yourself of that when you're on a team. You know, theirs was literally when they're in Iraq, you know, the enemy was not his commander that was asking him to turn in a report when really he had more important things to do, or when people were disagreeing amongst the team. They're not enemies with each other. They're actually on the team. The enemy is out there. So, and there's some good spiritual, you know, applications of that as well when it comes to working with a Christian team. So, okay, excellent, Jared. Thank you. Next question. What would qualify a conflict as productive or beneficial on a team? So what makes a conflict beneficial or helpful for a team?
I would say that if the conflict is producing a competitive spirit within the team, that would be okay. Conflicts will also provide situations where you could give your team a practice on working things out with each other or do a little team building.
Yeah, great. Dylan, were you going to jump on that one too?
Yeah, I was just going to say if it causes people to work harder to try to come up with better ideas or to come up with a better solution, I think when it causes people to put a little extra effort in, then that's when it's going to be beneficial, rather than just when everything's going smoothly, not really trying as hard or just doing the minimum.
Yep. Anyone else want to add to that? What type of conflict would actually be beneficial to a team?
I think there are times when a conflict could actually bring up more ideas that might not have been thought about before. So you actually might end up benefiting from that conflict because it points you in a different direction, and it might alert you to things that you realize need to change in order to benefit the project even more.
Yep.
I would say conflict will build resilience, especially with smaller teams. Whenever you have something happen or a conflict come up, you have to really pull together to be able to push through it and to overcome that obstacle. And every time that happens, you're just building your team stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. And you learn more about each other and learn how to work well with each other. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Max, were you going to jump on that?
Yeah, I was going to say something kind of similar to Caleb, where, working through a conflict will establish how your team works together, and it'll kind of set a precedent for how you handle conflicts later on down the road, and it builds teamwork as you unify and try to solve a problem.
Yep. Let me be transparent. I've been on a lot of teams, sometimes as a team member, sometimes as a team leader, and I've had plenty of conflicts. I know you're thinking that's pretty hard to believe that I would have any kind of conflict. But you know what it produces? Hopefully, humility. Because, if it points out pretty quickly in my own life whether or not the conflict is rooted in my self-reliance and my, thinking how brilliant I am and things like that versus my willingness to accomplish the mission. And it's a pretty quick indicator. And so conflict can actually lead to me growing just in my own walk with the Lord and in that resilience and team building that these guys mentioned, basically drawing the team together. It's a common story, right? Movies, books, any kind of drama, a lot of times out of a conflict comes a much stronger situation. It's a common thing. And that's why the military and businesses employ the use of controlled conflict to create that resilience. So very good. Okay, let me move on to the next one here. Oh, I did want to make one point about problem solving was the next chapter, and you guys had a lot to say about that. But always remember that people are not problems. Now, people can cause problems. The placement of people can create a problem, but you should never look at people as problems. Now, I'm saying this, guilty of this. I've looked at people as problems many, many times. So people are people. And problems can be created by people. Oftentimes they are, but you need to kind of separate the two. So, and in problem solving, it talked about defining the objectives, identifying problems or opportunities, gather data and present information, and then identify a range of possible solutions that satisfy the problem's objectives. And it talked about SMART goals. SMART, you're going to hear this with me, if you're in my classes, you're going to hear this hundreds of times during the years you're in my classes. SMART goals: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. This came up in both of our classes last semester briefly, and this is just going to keep coming up. It is a great way for you to remember how to set goals for problem solving. SMART goals: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time bound. In problem solving, there's this aspect of brainstorming. And in brainstorming, there need to be ground rules. So someone that hasn't answered yet, give me what you think should be some ground rules when it comes to a team having a brainstorming phase of problem solving. What would be at least one or two good ground rules before you go into a brainstorming phase of problem solving? Someone that hasn't answered yet.
I think having a specific amount of time set in place for how long someone can talk, just so they don't rant and like go on and on about how their idea might be better or someone else's might be worse, just determining that. And then putting the ideas on the table before you discuss them so that you have time to get to everybody's ideas. And then like, I guess not really a ground rule, but like something that you should do is just to write them down so that you have something for if you have to carry over the meeting to the next time. You have something that you have it written down and something visual so that people can reference it at a later date.
Excellent. That is, you pretty much covered about 80% of all the ground rules. If you learn that one lesson before you ever go into a brainstorming session, you will have a more productive brainstorming session than if you went into it not knowing what you're going to do. And someone needs to walk into that meeting the way Emmy just outlined and say, hey, here's some of the things that we just need to do. We're going to set a time limit. We're going to write everything down with no commentary before we even get into discussion. And so those are excellent ground rules. Any other ground rules you guys have thought of? Anyone else want to add to that?
I think another ground rule that you need to take into consideration is just like when you're brainstorming, you can't turn down anyone's ideas just because it's a brainstorming session. It's not a planning session that you need to establish what you're doing right then. You're just coming up with ideas.
Excellent. If we were playing Family Feud, that would be the number one answer. Survey says, ding, 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 number one. Emmy got numbers 2, 3, and 4. Number one is you cannot shoot down anyone's idea in brainstorming. And I know, you got that old trope of like, oh, there's no bad ideas. And well, there probably are. But during brainstorming, because you cannot prejudge anyone's concept for solving the problem within the ground rules, of course. And so the transaction is you're not going to prejudge each other's brainstorming ideas for problem solving. But in return, someone's not coming in with an agenda like they're going to manipulate this group into getting their way. So it's got to be both ways. Without that, you have that lack of trust, fear of conflict, avoidance of accountability. And now we got the 5 dysfunctions of a team. Very good. They talked a little bit about autocratic and democratic. When we got into decision making, actually, one of you asked in your summary, how much personal research should a leader do as information is being brought to them in decision making? How much personal research should a leader do? I would say, it kind of depends on the situation and the leader. Leaders should not neglect the personal responsibility to become educated about how to make a decision or the information themselves. Sometimes they need to get third-party information to kind of verify what's being brought to them. And then Dylan had a good question. There's that quality function deployment table, which could be very confusing. If you're just looking at it, you're like, how does this relate to problem solving? All it is creating a tool where you can measure the value of the different possibilities so you can make a decision that uses math. It's actually really great. And some of you that are more math minded. So my wife and I actually did this without knowing this is what it was called. When we were in Guam, we were looking at houses here in Ankeny. We found 5 houses that we liked, right? So, and with the multiple listing service, MLS, when you look at houses, you can look at all the different aspects of the house, not just price, but square footage, the size of the lot, how many bedrooms, where's the laundry room. So my wife and I came up with our top 12 things about any house that if we could pick, if we could find a house that had all 12 things, that would be an A+, like number one house for us. Well, what we found was there were a couple of houses that had like 9 of these 12 things. And 1 or 2 of them had like all but one thing in common. So we had to step away from the process and say, okay, we need to assign a weight or a value to each one of these things. And so what we said was, all these things are important to us, but some would be more important than others. So a laundry room on the same floor as the bedrooms versus an office. Well, we had to decide which one's more. Well, we'd like to have both, but if you can't have both, well, the laundry room edges out the office a little bit. And then we we started going down through. So we assigned a numeric value to each one of those things. Basically, we just did, 10 points for the number 1, 9 points for the number 2. And we were able to decide on a house that actually came out 3 points higher in our little scale. When we were just looking at the houses side by side, we just could not make a decision. But when we put a numeric value, we weighted it based on our priorities, we were able to come up with a decision that we felt really good about. And then, 3 months later, we're like, why did we buy this house again? What was it about this house versus other houses? What keeps us from going and looking at other houses a month after we've moved in? Well, we know that we found the best one based on our own scale. So Dylan's question was weight versus priority. Actually, the weight, the number you assign, however you create your little chart, is based on your priorities. So weight comes from the priority. What is the, if you had to pick 10 things, one, they're all important, but one must be the most important, give that one 10 points. Then something is just slightly less important, give that one 9 points. Those are your priorities. The weight comes from the priority. It's a pretty great way to make really tough decisions. And the more expensive, the more difficult the decision, the better it is to do that. So I used up the entire time, so sorry about that. We're not going to have time to break out into our breakout rooms. What I would like to do, though, is I will touch base with Caleb and Max. I already sent them some information. We need to pull together one presentation that has the kind of the best of both presentations incorporated into one. And then we have to come up with a way of presenting this on Thursday, possibly to the ad council. So the president, executive vice president, all the different, Dr. Rath and all these people. So we're working on that right now. We're at least going to present it to Mr. Gogarty, Mr. Davis, a couple of the other creative folks. But it might go all the way up the chain to the board even. So I'll chat with Max and Caleb a little later. They already have some basic information that they need to push down to you guys. This is going to be one of those projects, and I know some of you hated this about the other class, but you're going to grade yourself, all right? So this kind of puts you in a unique situation where the first 90% of any project is kind of the most obvious, straightforward part of any project. The last 10%, to me, my personality, is always the hardest part. I call it landing the plane. So flying the plane, to me, is easy. Landing the plane, that's where most crashes happen. So we have to pull this together in a way that's coherent and convincing, where we get everyone to contribute and we are able to present this final product to the customers, which in this case are the creative people, communication all the way up the chain. So I want you to all be thinking about that. I'll talk to Max and Caleb a little later today, but we have to get this done and we have to land the plane. Really, Thursday would be ideal. We don't have to reinvent everything. You guys have already done all the work. It's more integrating the two presentations, coming up with what do you want the format to look like? How do you want it listed? We got to do it in a concise way. How many people will present? There's one or two extra little things I shot there to Max and Caleb about someone maybe sharing, what they've learned through this process, because it does help the program as well. But so I'll communicate with you guys a little bit later. If you want to stay on with me, I can hang around for a couple minutes. I see Jared want to stay back. So Gracie and Eric, thank you both for joining us today. Really appreciate it. You guys have a great day. Everyone else, you're welcome to leave unless you want to stay back and chat with me for 5 minutes before my next class. Jared Ball, what's up?
Good, sir. I was thinking about how we could present this to, and since it's apparently going to go several different places, I had an idea that if the team leaders are okay with it and if you think it's a good idea, I would be totally fine if we had all the information, packaging it, and making a video, however long you needed it to be, so that you could actually play it on a screen or project it for the ad council or whoever.
Yeah, I mean, if I would talk to, obviously Max and Caleb are gonna have something to say about this, and you might want to get Katie involved on that too. So the upside of video is exactly why Jared's suggesting it. It is, exactly what's being communicated. It is, you can almost perfect it. The downside is, since you're not professional video editors, it could create an additional amount of work beyond what your current workload has been up to this point. So a PowerPoint, talking through a PowerPoint with a couple of people sharing is one level of work. Creating a video would standardize it, but you might create, now, depending on, maybe someone has the time to do it, or that's the way you guys decide to go. So I'd be thrilled with that. Something that would work also, though, is if we do the presentation, let's say that we do the presentation for Andrew Goreedy, Mark Davis, and a couple other people on Thursday during class. Because I'm the host of the Zoom call, it does record it all, including even records your shared screen. And as you've seen, like if you've watched any of the YouTube videos of the classes, so we would have a recording. It's just not going to be like a movie format. So you guys would have to talk through that. But I think that'd be one great way of doing it. It's just a matter of you guys deciding who would actually do that, because it's going to be the final product would be one person would have to kind of take ownership of that final piece of it.
So let me just jump in real quick. Me and Max had an opportunity to connect last night, kind of discuss the workload, kind of a game plan of what we're going to do, or how we're going to attack this thing. So after our discussion last night, I was able to gather up all the information that was requested from my team for the Gray project and all that stuff, kind of universalized it, was able to send a report to Max. And after having a conversation, kind of what we couldn't figure out was exactly what we wanted to do for a presentation, how many people we had for that. But Max kind of had a really good question for you as regarding to that. But I sent all of our information over to Max to copy and paste and give to Katie, because after having our conversation last night, we kind of decided that we're going to have Katie do the PowerPoint presentation. But yeah, Max, you feel free to chime in. And obviously all of that's fluid, but after connecting last night, we kind of divvied up workload a little bit. But yeah, Max, if you have anything to say about that.
I'm definitely open to the idea of doing a video. I think that's a really good idea. And like Jared said, I think it'd be a good way of standardizing it. And if it's done well, it would look really professional. I think the biggest challenge with that would be the time investment in that, because like he said, that would kind of fall on one person. And given how late it is in the semester and knowing that there's a lot of final projects coming in, I wouldn't want to just assign that on somebody. I guess one of the questions I had for you, Mr. Baldwin, in regards to the message you sent us yesterday, for the part where it was like talking about what we learned from it, the way that I read it, it sounded like you wanted either Caleb or I or both of us to do something like that. Did you want both
Not
of us to talk?
Not necessarily. No.
Okay.
So I was trying to think of how can we get, so obviously there are 4 people that are going to be super involved in this over the next 2 days. Caleb, Max, Jared, Katie, because you guys all have to be communicating to pull all this together. And out of the 4 people I just listed, at least 2 or 3 of you are probably the most likely candidates to do a lot of the talking if there's a presentation. The way to get more people involved so that they help get across the finish line is to maybe get a testimonial from someone that would normally be maybe a little, Tim, Emmy, Krista, go down the list. People that would not necessarily volunteer to be the spokesperson, but they might be willing to share 1 minute on, I just want to share quickly what I learned through this process. This has been, I realize that this is how a team works and whatever. I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth. But if let's say you had 1 person from each team, well, now you got at least 6 people involved in the final product. Or you could have, 4 people do 30-second testimonials real quick. Mm-hmm. Zoom obviously lends itself towards that type of collaboration, because literally someone can unmute themselves, speak very briefly, mute themselves. So I would just like to have as much participation as possible without creating an artificial, I don't want to feel forced, but I would assume, just from the initial feedback I'm getting, people are learning things. They are enjoying certain aspects of it. I don't want them to say anything about me. I don't want them to say anything specifically about the class. Oh, this is the best class ever. I just honest, real feedback that would be helpful. One thing is, let me relieve you guys, and then I got to go to my next class, but let me relieve you of the pressure. The pitch meeting, is not actually the final product for the board necessarily. What I mean is, your goal, your landing of the plane, is to deliver your top ideas on Thursday to Andrew Gogarty and anyone else he invites to the meeting. From there, let's say that we record that Zoom call. That could be replayed for the ad council. Or they might say, hey, would you redo the same thing? Would you Zoom into our ad meeting and give us the same presentation? It would still be the same thing. What I don't want you to feel like, oh, now we got to create like a pro level video that's going to go to the board. If it gets to that point, Andrew Gogarty would have to ask people to put that together, whether it's his own department, because he has some video resources. We got Joey Young, different people, or he might just say, hey, let's just do a new Zoom call at the board meeting in mid-May, and we'll have your 6 presenters all Zoom in, and then the rest of the class could Zoom in just to observe, but it's after the semester's over anyway. So I just want to relieve you. The final product does not have to be like, this is going on television on Thursday. It's really landing the plane is presenting on Thursday to Andrew Gogarty and anyone he invites. So that's really the final part of it. And then we might have to do it more than once if they really need us to, which of course we'd be glad to do. So does that make sense? Okay. All right. I got to run to my ethics class. Guys, thank you very much. If you have any other questions, let me know. I want to help. We're going to, as Caleb says, kill. No, just kidding. We're not going to kill anybody or anything. All right. See you guys later.